Afternoon, everyone. My name's Warrick McLean, CEO of Coleman, Greig, and it's great that everyone's able to join us this afternoon. Welcome to the CLI Outma Innovation and Legal Tech Week 2021. Today's day 2. Thank you for everyone that's joining us. I know we've got plenty of people from Australia and New Zealand, but more importantly, we've also got many of our colleagues globally joining us. Today's session is focusing on future-proofing in a disruptive legal market, and I'd like to welcome our panellists for today. Firstly, welcome to Genevieve Collins from Lander & Rogers.
Thanks, Warrick. I'm delighted to be here. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Jen. We've got Marcus McCarthy from Nexus Legal.
Hi, Warrick. Hi, everyone.
We've got Hilary Goodyear from Ashurst.
Thanks, Warrick. Hi, everyone.
And last but definitely not least, Mick Shee from PwC.
Thanks, Warrick. Hello, everyone.
Hey, guys. We've got, I suppose, an informative session this afternoon. We go for about 90 minutes, so it's a relatively long session, and we get the opportunity, I suppose, to delve. And again, I think the panelists that we've got today provide a broad cross-section of what's happening in the marketplace, and the bios for everyone on the panel today were attached in the promotional material. So I hope everyone that's dialed in this afternoon has the opportunity to review everybody's, I suppose, backstory. We might kick off today's session, and I suppose I'd just like to reflect on I suppose the change that's happening in the industry, and part of that has been obviously driven by lots of things, but more importantly, I suppose in the last 12 months, COVID has really disrupted the legal market. And I might kick off with Hilary in terms of your thoughts around what's been driving the change. Has there been a burning platform? Yeah, what's your thoughts on that, Hilary?
Thanks, Warrick. And look, I think there's definitely been a change. There's no doubt about that. And I think there's more openness and a willingness to kind of explore ways of working. But I think for me, what COVID has done has more so changed where we work rather than necessarily how we work. And that's not to underestimate at all. I think the impact of where we have been working and technologies like Zoom and how we've adapted and integrated, for example, e-signatures into our daily lives. But I think that there's still a lot of scope to be a lot more kind of transformational in terms of looking at, really how we're doing our work, the types of technologies and processes that we're integrating into legal workflows. And, I think COVID has certainly opened the door for that. I think it's been a catalyst for that. But I think right now, most people are still focused, and necessarily we all went into COVID, with no notice. It was something that we had to respond to, in most cases overnight. And therefore, I think it was an incredible accelerant, things that might have taken years to get through, under the old ways of working, I think, just necessarily had to be adopted overnight. But I think we're still weighted towards the where we work and the communication and the collaboration tools. And I'd like to certainly see us, looking a little bit more to the how we work and how we integrate, more automation, more AI, more workflow into how we're providing legal services.
Thanks, Hilary. Jen, in terms of your, obviously your experience, and obviously your firm is up and down the East Coast, but a good chunk of it obviously based in Victoria. How has, Lander & Rogers responded over the last 12 months, and has COVID influenced that?
Yeah, thanks, Warrick. I think from my point of view, I think COVID has had an enormous impact, and I think we're talking today about technology and innovation, but for me, the starting point is to look at the impact of COVID on people and culture. And I think if I had to describe 3 different impacts that COVID's had on people and culture, which impact how we in turn interact with technology and build out innovation, I think the first thing we're all reading about is a reassessment and changing expectations. There's definitely been, from our point of view, changing expectations about career, about purpose, even about life expectations. And certainly, as Hillary's mentioned about the ideal working environment, there's absolutely no doubt about that. There is a bit of a sense of recovery, I think, and reinvention, how we attract and engage our people. And I think there's an emphasis and an increased desire for alignment around purpose and values within firms. And I think all of those impact this kind of reassessment issue, the changing expectations of our workforce. Plus, I guess I'll add into that the exhaustion factor. I don't think we can overlook that. The other thing I think that's really quite clear is the blurring, some would say, I think, complete obliteration between boundaries of work and home. And I think as we've seen remote working being possible and actually being very positive, there's all of those changing and evolving views about how we should be working. So I can tell you that 90% of our 500 people say they want to work 2 to 3 days permanently from home. That's got significant impacts for technology and innovation. The other thing I think that's changed, the third thing, is this willingness to experiment from lawyers, from clients, from courts. And with that, I think the expectations about what lawyers can and should now be delivering. And I think clients increasingly are prepared to consider new options, not just in terms of legal providers. I think that's been pre-COVID as well, different size and types of firms and organisations, but actually looking at new ways of solving legal problems. And the biggest barriers, which I think they were identified in a survey that ALTA did last year, the Australian Legal Technology Association, the biggest barriers to adopting new technologies were resources, cost, and fear of change. I think there's now widespread acceptance, and I really think the whole perception and value of technology and the ability to work remotely has seen an absolute shift in that. The idea that you need change management now, I think, has significantly diminished in my view. So I think it's a good sobering reflection to look at the impact on culture and people and to see how that then will feed through into what we should be doing around technology and innovation.
So Marcus, in terms of your experience, have we reached a tipping point? Has COVID been the nucleus for everything that's gone before it in terms of innovation and change? And to Jen's point there, just right at the end, in terms of the need for change management, firms just getting on with it? Yeah, what's your thoughts?
Oh, look, I definitely agree that COVID was an accelerant, but I feel it's part of a broader spectrum of change that was occurring well before that, even in terms of, say, new law emerging 10 years ago and leading up to a point where technology in sort of 2016, 2017 started to really rise up. And then I think COVID has taught us all that things do need to change, and the way we deliver legal services needs to change and modernise, and this is just part of it. I don't know if we've reached a tipping point as such. I think you're kind of referring to like what stage of disruption are we at? Is it a tipping point into something completely new? Yes and no. And I feel sort of quite conflicted on that point. Are we at the beginning of industry disruption, or are we nearing the end? And I really struggle to answer that question. One part of me says, no, we've got a long way to go. And another part says, you know what, we've actually seen all of the technologies that have actual meaningful impact in the legal industry. We have already seen it in emergent form, and that will just continue to progress to a very usable form. And that will, I think, change the client experience. And we as lawyers need, and industry participants need to change and go with that to improve the client experience, which is what it's all about. So I think we have started to reach a tipping point, but we have actually been experiencing disruption for some time. And I think now we're at a mature-ish stage. I'm really interested to see the panel's views on this. And that what we will see is a refinement of existing point solutions into consolidated end-to-end solutions that have meaning to clients as opposed to just having meaning to us as lawyers or professionals.
Marcus, I'd love to pick up on that point you just mentioned there about, the end-to-end solutions. I'm so passionate about that I think we still You know, a lot of the solutions that are out there are very point solutions and very point focused. But I think talking about that tipping point, and Warrick, you mentioned this earlier in terms of the burning platform, you know, I still think we do have issues around the burning platform. And, you know, whilst I think we've come leaps and bounds in the last few years, I really do think that there's, you know, we need to, you know, there needs to be a shift in the business model. If you look at the real disruptors that are out there in any industry, it's not just a product and service disruption. It's not just about, you know, driving efficiencies. It's actually about business model disruption. And I think there's still quite a long way for us to go in the legal industry to completely disrupt, you know, the traditional business model of law. And, you know, whether there is a burning platform for that yet, whether we actually truly, you know, understand, and there are people within the industry, all of us, and I'm sure many of the people who are listening here today, that do understand that there's a fundamental shift happening within our industry. But whether we are the minority or the majority, I think we could have a really good discussion on. I think there are still many, many more people who don't understand that the industry is being disrupted. They are still, you know, off the back of the Royal Commission in Australia, you know, law firms have had some of their most successful years ever. And you would, you know, you'd find a lot of people sitting there saying, you know, why do we need to change? Life's great. You know, we've got lots of work, you know, things are continuing on well. And so I think there is a lot of work still to be done around the burning platform, and only when we get there are we going to see that real tipping point.
So Marcus, if obviously the people on today's session are going to be coming from private practice and obviously in-house counsel teams, what do you say to those people in understand how they should move forward? Because again, as we've spoken many times on these type of forums, there's so much going on. And yeah, how do organisations, I suppose, focus on what they need to get done?
Oh, look, you know, it's such a big question, isn't it? Future-proofing in a disrupted market with all this stuff that's out there, and how, you know, I think all of these sessions are about trying to create a roadmap for people and give them education as to, you know, what is out there. But even just setting aside a disruptive legal market, we are all trying to future-proof ourselves and our career and businesses. You know, this is a fundamental human need to create certainty. So we talk about the burning platform. This is what it's all about. How do we actually create a platform that we can all just breathe easy for a while and say, here's the roadmap, here's the industry, here's the ecosystem. And I think things are settling into a bit of a pattern, and things are emerging that have traction in the industry, like legal project management and contract management platforms and things that bolt into the legal service very effectively. And then we just need to work out what of those things actually enables us as lawyers, what is positive innovation that adds to our world, and what is negative disruption. So I think it's really hard looking at everything out there. I think what is really good for people to do, particularly people starting up new businesses, is to try and look through the hype and evaluate things in the context of whether it is positive innovation, or is it just hype or negative disruption, something that is undermining, I guess, the legal process. A lot of stuff kind of emulates the process, and it doesn't necessarily improve quality or outcomes for clients, even though they say that it does. And I think for us as professionals, we will need to cut through all of that smoke screen and all the stuff that's out there and think about what's real and what is real for us as individuals and as businesses, because not all of it even has relevance to what we're doing. And if we focus on what our path is and work out what our roadmap is, then that in itself is a path to success. So I think the most important thing in say, future-proofing and what I would say to people is try and create certainty, and more importantly, what that brings is longevity in your career and business. So that's what future-proofing really is. And I think that is the challenge, to work out what are the things you should completely ignore and what are the things you should actually take notice of and perhaps apply in your own business, because it will produce a better outcome for clients. And if we're not in business to do that, then what's the point?
And Mick, your thoughts around if people are joining us today and trying to work through the muddle of where to head, Obviously, you deal with in-house counsel teams from time to time. Yeah, what's your approach?
Yeah, I mean, just perhaps just commenting on some of the things we've already discussed. I agree that I guess changes and disruption of our industry was taking place pre-COVID, and I agree with Hillary's point that those people that were sort of on board with it were probably in the minority. But what I do think has happened through COVID is that the gap between those that were on board and believing in change and those that were perhaps looking at it more cynically and skeptically has narrowed. And for those that were on board, probably the changes through COVID have been a bit more incremental. And whereas those that were perhaps more in the sort of naysaying camp, I think they've seen that change has been not just sort of forced upon them, but been very effective. And so I think the actual appetite for change now is much greater. And so I think so the audience for, I guess, seeing, for listening to propositions around change, new products, new ideas is greater, and which probably means that we're the potential for confusion is also greater. And so we need to do a better job of helping our industry really understand and work their way through noise, positive innovation and negative disruption, as Marcus was describing. In terms of the sort of way that we approach this, when we're talking to our clients, and particularly clients that are sort of being a bit overwhelmed with the number of ideas and products and new information in the market, our starting point is always to start with strategy and work out what is your strategy, and then in terms of where does your legal department, we're mostly talking to legal departments, I think the same thing applies to law firms, but where do you want to be over the next 1, 3, 5 years, and then work out what market trends might apply to your strategy. I think it's also then important to have a couple of lenses. The first lens that is critical is to try and break down what within your strategy, what's going to be BAU, what's going to be continuous improvement, and what's going to be transformational. Because a lot of these market trends, a lot of this noise will appeal to those different, I guess, aspects of your strategy. And naturally, you're going to be spending a lot more effort on BAU than you will on continuous improvement, and you should be spending a lot more effort on continuous improvement than transformation. There's a lot, continuous improvement is something that you need to be, I guess it's less risky, but requires more sustained effort. Transformation is going to have more risk and needs to be a sort of a more sporadic sort of approach. The last thing I guess I'd say is, as well as think about, I guess, BAU versus continuous improvement and transformation, think about where you sit on the maturity curve of all of these new, I guess, products and market trends. Being able to sort of recognize where you sit is critical. And if you haven't got the basics right, that's going to be a big blocker to adopting any sort of change, because it'll be very difficult to take on sophisticated point solutions or more advanced technologies or skill sets if you haven't actually got the basics right. And it was mentioned before, thinking about sort of end-to-end processes. If you don't have an end-to-end digital solution, it's going to be very limited value having a really high-end point solution that doesn't actually fit into an end-to-end digital solution. Same applies for processes and people. You've got to be thinking about getting your basics right before you start getting too carried away by a lot of the sort of advanced ideas, products, and sort of services that are hitting the market.
Nick, I love the statement about getting the basics right, because in answer to Warrick's question, with all this stuff out there, and even for me, having been focused on technology and structural revisions to the law firm for years, I've almost come full circle and said future-proofing is about the basics. It's bringing it back to people and good quality systems and, culture and mission. If you don't get those right, then you're not going to future-proof no matter how innovative you are. So, I think, you know, we look at all this stuff, and I think it's always good for people to remember that there is a core of what we do that will never change. So I've used the iceberg analogy in the past, where there's this sort of bespoke zone of human level interaction that can't change. So it's good for people in future-proofing in a disruptive market to latch onto the fact that, or take comfort from the fact that there is this zone of human interaction that we need to get right. This is the basics, working with good people, great client experiences. You can't deliver a point solution like Mick says unless it interfaces with a bigger, broader solution. And I think the exciting thing these days is that there is now technology that can bring in different solutions to work together. They're called APIs. And I think that will increase in the future, or the sophistication of integrations between platforms. So, but you know, all the technology in the world won't save a business or future-proof your business if you don't get the people side of it right.
Warrick, I might jump in and answer one of the questions.
Thanks, Mark.
Might jump in and answer one of the questions, if that's okay, about an example of a different business model, because I think with all this discussion about how we future-proof, it's really important, I think, to distinguish between digital tools and perhaps new business models. And one of the questions addresses that, or asks that. So I can give an example of something that Landers has just developed recently. Obviously, it's a small-scale business model shift, but instead of thinking about, lawyers, of course, just think about selling time, but instead of doing that, selling a business or system solution, I think Marcus described it as an end-to-end solution. It's much broader than the kind of debate about hourly rate versus value or fixed pricing. It's actually shifting the model. So we were approached by a multinational car manufacturer who engaged us to provide advice about meeting their OH&S regulations. And traditionally, what a firm, Landers, would have done would have been given them a 50-page advice, said, this is what you're not doing, this is what you're required to do, and this is what you now need to do, send the bill, see you later. And instead, what we did was we didn't do that. We built their regulatory obligations into an online platform so that they could continue to use it and we would continue to keep it updated. So it's a different concept of selling legal services, whether it's a complete change in business model. I think it probably is, because it's really that subscription-based selling rather than a one-off advice. And I'm sure other people on the panel will have other examples of that too.
And yeah, Genevieve, sorry, Hilary, I'll just jump in. There's a question on the Q&A which kind of links back to that whole trends piece. It's from Iris Greaves. How much of an impact does digitisation of the courts and government systems have on the industry transition to full digital conversion? And I might throw that out to the panel. And Genevieve, I might throw to you first, because in some of the pre-work we did for this session, you spoke about, I think, a US application called Lemonade. And potentially you might be able to weave that example into that question from Iris there in terms of the way the courts have had to change in the last 12 months as well.
Yeah, thanks, Warrick. Well, it feeds into a number of these issues that we've been talking about, the primary issue of which is authenticity to your own firm. What's relevant to you? For us at Landers, half of our work's litigation. So we've been involved in one of our alumni, actually there is still a current resident at the Law Tech Hub, TA Law, who's developed an e-brief platform. And that's had incredible take up during COVID. I think even at the Victorian Bar, there was 10% increase every month. So I imagine every barrister by now will have signed up to this e-brief platform, which from a law firm's point of view, enables us now to assemble briefs in 15 minutes by a lawyer rather than a hard copy brief, which was 2.5 hours. But so that's relevant to us and that's really exciting. So in answer to Iris's question, I think virtual trials are possible, and I think that has changed forever. I don't think we'll be going back to an in-person justice model, 100% in-person justice model ever again. The example that you've raised about Lemonade, Landers is also has a large insurance practice. And so I think it's important to keep on top of, insofar as you can, what's disrupting relevant sectors for your clients. So what's disrupting insurer clients at the moment is a company some of you will have heard of, I'm sure, called Lemonade, which is a US online insurer. It's a NASDAQ company, and it offers essentially property and casualty insurance. But the interesting thing in the shift in model for that insurance company is that you purchase insurance and you resolve your claims online via a chatbot and an AI application, which is completely different. Now, as lawyers advising the insurance industry, I think we are required to be on top of what that involves. So I haven't done it yet, but it has occurred to me that one fun thing would be get all our insurance lawyers one Lemonade share so they could get access to all the market information about Lemonade on an ongoing basis. I think the share's currently at $140, but you can join up on Stake. Stake, you will know, is the Australian startup like Robinhood, very topical at the moment, but you can join up on Stake for free. Don't pay any commissions. We can give everyone one insurer and they can keep one share of Lemonade and they can see what they're doing. It's a fun idea.
Vote in a new board.
There you go, folks. You heard it here. Get on to Lemonade. Hey, so Marcus, in terms of, I suppose, at the other end of the spectrum, in terms of that, the way in which courts and government have had to evolve over the last 12 months, and I've said this publicly before, I think the courts and some government agencies have kind of been inhibitors, and ultimately, for those that operate in the litigation space, they're key influences of how the profession operates. And it's been great to see some of the changes. How do you see that moving forward, and will some of those changes stick? And back to Iris's question in terms of, will it ultimately see the full digitisation of the profession?
Well, I should say I used to do a lot of litigation, but these days I'm pretty much chained to a desk. So I'm aware of all the changes in the court system, and it's just a no-brainer, isn't it? I mean, look at this forum. You can identify me, I can give evidence, and I'm sure judges would love it because they can switch off people's mics. So, there's just a really easy solution to negotiate things online. It works. Alternate dispute resolution platforms, they work. They're convenient for the participants. They're convenient for the arbitrator or the judge. So I think that process will continue. I think the courts are starting to see the benefit, and that's just a pure function of familiarity with these systems. And that was COVID was a massive driver of that, and I don't think we'll ever go back. As to full digitisation, I think that's broader than the court interface platforms. That gets to the concept of digital contracting, end-to-end solutions, and will we ever see a time where all or pretty much all of the legal process can be digitised? I think yes, in that if you create a proper process, a digital process or a digital contracting process, you can interface with the real world really effectively and draw in experts as and when you need them as part of the platform. So to that extent, of course, there is always going to be a real world component and human interaction, but I do feel it could be part of an end-to-end platform. Our role as lawyers is actually really efficiently engaged at certain points in time during a workflow process between two or more parties, whether it be a court, whether it be two contracting parties. So I kind of feel like yes, and that's exactly what we are working towards with our particular technology project, because I do believe that it's all part of a process and a workflow, and if you get that right, then lawyers are just an organic part of that workflow, as are other professionals and other skill set at a time. So for me, it's all about multi-party collaboration, bringing in multidisciplinary sets that can actually interface in one forum that has relevance to businesses. So I kind of think we can get there, but I think it's very clunky at the moment and very point driven. The progression in the court technology is fantastic. It is a point solution. So through APIs, I'd like to be able to see in the future that drawing into other digital platforms as just part of the workflow process of a litigation or a dispute resolution. It starts outside the court, it then goes into the court, and you can sort of pull out the knowledge that is gained in that full workflow process to be used in the court section of that process.
I might just add, Mark, I think
Thanks, Mark.
I was going to say on this concept of full digitisation, I think perhaps it's not necessarily the most helpful way to look at it. It's very much a continuum, I think, is the way that we have to think about these things. When you, for instance, when we saw the very first AI document review tools, I think the turnaround time was 48 hours, and so clearly it wasn't a machine doing all of the work. There was people at the back end, but that's those times have come down. There's been less human review as time has gone on different certain types of documents. I think the main point is that the digitisation is as I said, it's a continuum. I think that we can expect to see the rate of pace pick up. There's always going to be roles for humans to play in these processes, and we're going to continue to make more progress. But the one thing I sort of think about when we think about COVID and we think about even the courts and going online is we're just not likely to go back. And I think that when you think about digitisation as a continuum, we're continually making progress. Sometimes progress is slower, sometimes it's faster, but it's unlikely that we're going to retreat. And I think that's probably the most helpful way to sort of think about it as a timeline.
And sorry, Mick, question for you and Hilary, in terms of then taking that to the next level, in terms of our organisations, and I suppose back to that earlier comment that you made in terms of strategy and looking at things, I suppose, from a high level and then drilling down. From a data reporting metrics perspective, where do you see us going in that space, and where potentially just some of us need to go?
So I might sort of start with, I think this is a very big topic. When we think about the different technologies that we're using in our workplace, in our legal departments, our law firms, often those technologies are there to fulfill a certain function. We've talked about point solutions, particularly when you get to a world where you have end-to-end digital processes, and you're creating proper digital environments. You've got a combination of technologies that are meant to be there to do different things, but perhaps the biggest benefit is that now we actually are getting data on everything that we're doing. And I think it's that data that is actually going to put a spotlight on our businesses, our organisations, and make it really easy to understand, or easier to understand where we're performing well, where we're not performing so well. We're able to sort of compare apples with apples properly against other organisations, against other benchmarks. And it's once we see that in black and white that our managers of legal departments, our GCs, our legal operations departments, the partners of law firms will be able to really understand how you can compare and whether or not you're actually getting bang for your buck out of your innovation efforts, out of your investments in change. And if those people don't get it, then the businesses that they support will get it. And so data is actually going to be, I think, the biggest driver of change. I can perhaps comment a bit on how on data strategy and how you approach that, but maybe I might sort of pause there and see, Hilary, did you have anything to add there, given you and I were both fielded that question?
Yeah, no, look, I completely agree. And I think, my view is that the new law leaders, so those that are going to take kind of the leading role in this space in the future, are going to be those who genuinely figure out how to harness the power of data. I think we have so much data, particularly if you think of law firms, how much data that we hold, across industries, not just in relation to individual clients, but across industries. But what do we do with that data? And I think, the organisations that figure out how not only, and Mick talked a bit there about how you leverage the data to look at kind of your own kind of efficiencies and productivity, but I think it's the organisations who figure out how to leverage that data to provide true insights to clients, and true insights across industries that are going to be the real market leaders of the future. And I think there's still a long way to go there. I don't think we even, genuinely yet as a profession understand the power of data, let alone how to leverage that in providing insights to our clients. But I think it's incredibly powerful, and it's kind of a watch this space, because I think we're starting to see the momentum build. And certainly I think the organisations that figure out how to turn data and information into real actionable insights for their clients are going to be, as I said, the new law leaders.
I think that's really well put, Hilary. And one of the benefits of being in an organisation like PwC, and perhaps one of the key reasons I joined, was there's a huge body of work and expertise that has been applied in adjacent functions to legal, to other corporate support functions, many of which, perhaps most of which, have been on this journey longer than legal. But that journey is very similar. And if there's one way of describing the journey in terms of digital transformation, it would be to move from a function that is very transactional in nature to one that is providing insights. And that is going to be the expectation of all corporate support functions, and legal is not going to be immune from that. And those insights all come from data. And legal departments are having to sit on very rich data sets. The data that sits in the organisation's contract sets or sort of portfolio of disputes is incredibly rich, and it's not typically been I guess a skill set that legal departments have had, but are going to need more and more, because providing insights on how to avoid contract leakage, or how to get be more sophisticated or strategic in on negotiating or running settlements, etc. These are going to be the sort of types of just some examples of insights that the better performing legal departments will be able to provide to their businesses, and their businesses will expect if they're going to continue to invest in those legal departments.
Marcus, your thoughts on that?
Oh, I love this discussion. There is a huge amount of untapped data just in contracts. And if you think any M&A lawyer out there, the first thing they do when they do their due diligence is to run through all the active contracts. So I'm talking renewal dates, extensions of time, asset values. If you're running a big organisation and you have a way to capture that data, and this is the very thing that we are working on with the Open Law platform, it's actually about enterprise value. That this is the very thing that drives enterprise value and gives them knowledge of their own enterprise value. So I think there's a lot of talk about big data, but I'm not sure there's a lot of things out there that really draw it out in a really useful, contextualized way for businesses. And certainly even in the legal function, that's the first thing we might want to look for in trying to manage that, whether you're an in-house counsel or an external counsel interfacing with that corporate in-house team. So yeah, it goes way beyond just the movement of an asset, although that is a big aspect, because every single contract moves some form of asset. In some cases, that asset is a right to services over a period of time that has a value. And what systems are not doing is pulling out and connecting the dots on that data, and then pulling out contextualized reporting for the board or the managers of that organisation. So I just think there is, I think we'll see over there, and it sort of gets back to my discussion about end-to-end solutions. This is part of a thing that would interface, because in order to get that data, you've got to link that to the formation of contracts and the workflows or the interface between two or more parties. So I think you've got to build what I'm calling the digital infrastructure for that sort of thing to work properly, which means systems who are doing point solutions need to come together to build that digital infrastructure. And then we can all leverage off that, both professionals and organisations. So contract data is king, and people don't even realise it, even in corporates. They know it's there, they just don't know how to access it efficiently.
Marcus, great segue. And Jen, I might throw to you. There's a question from Iris, and Iris, thank you. You're beaming in from West Australia today. And this kind of gets back to that whole collaboration piece, which Marcus, you were just touching on there right at the end. Iris's question is, do you think the intellectual property each firm has assigned to their own knowledge prevents us having the industry come together to contribute and lay the foundations for the future?
Thanks, Iris, for that really interesting question. I'll just close off on what Marcus was saying in our discussion about data. I think it's really getting back to basics with data, because at the moment, I think my understanding from a lay point of view, I'm a lawyer, not a technologist, but we still store data predominantly in our main data is in a document management system. It's not in a database. Therefore, it's not stored in any useful form. Therefore, it can't be retrieved in any useful form. So we have to go back to the basics, and we have to start using proper databases with retrieval, with storage and retrieval mechanisms that make sense and enable us to use that data. In terms of your question around collaboration, I think part of this willingness to experiment and part of the shift, I think, post-COVID is really an increase towards generosity in collaboration. And I believe that passionately. I think it's certainly part of Lander and Rogers' mandate really with our Law Tech Hub, where we bridge the gap between lawyers and technologists. We don't take equity in the startups. What we're doing is contributing essentially to the legal tech ecosystem by sponsoring their space. And I think we're not the only law firm that's doing that. I think it's the willingness to collaborate, the fact that we're having this very open, frank discussion, sharing everything we know, and being willing to answer questions and explore business options and talk about what examples of what we're actually doing within our law firms demonstrates that. And I think the other way we're collaborating also is with educational institutions. So I can speak for us. We're just running a 12-week legal tech elective with Monash University. We're also involved in RMIT Online. We're involved with New South Wales legal careers, etc. And that is all part of this collaboration for the greater good, I think. And I'm really hopeful that that's a positive. I'm not sure if that answers your question specifically.
Genevieve, I think that's a great answer. And if I could just build on it as well. You mentioned sort of generosity. I actually think ultimately this will end up being a competitive advantage, that those that collaborate within our industry better will end up prospering better. And I think that for a couple of reasons. I think firstly, I think this whole idea of sort of not collaborating to protect IP, it can be sort of a natural safe place for lawyers to go. It's there is a mindset there that is consistent with the way in which we perhaps have been trained, or perhaps even advise our clients. But I believe that that mindset is probably it will get in the way of collaboration, but I think it might be protecting against something that's not nearly as concerning as not doing it. And we're personally involved in a collaboration we've been working on since last October with one of our key competitors, and we actually think that the collaboration itself is quite innovative. We haven't in the new law space. We haven't seen an example of it before, but we're doing it A, because we think there's a benefit for the industry, but B, we ultimately believe our organisations are going to benefit from it, both of them. And the final thing I was going to say about it is it's a lot easier to collaborate when you actually think a little bit more broadly about who it is that we're competing with. When you're thinking it sort of in the traditional way that our traditional competitors are the same law firms that we've always been in business against, or the other service providers within the legal industry, it can be a little bit harder to think about collaborating. But if we think about it through the lens of, if we don't actually change the industry, then there'll be just a whole load of other new entrants. The businesses themselves will start to actually decide to self-serve on their legal needs. Suddenly, the competitors actually look a bit different. They don't look so much like the traditional competitors that we go to market with. They're actually all these other forces that are going to come in down the track if we don't actually drive the change ourselves. And so if you have that lens, then collaboration and working together to actually drive change in the industry becomes are not negotiable. And I think that will make it easier for those that can see that to collaborate, and ultimately those that do see that and do collaborate will be the better performing, more profitable businesses of the future.
Hilary, in terms of your sense of that whole collaboration piece, are you seeing it more and more in your world?
Absolutely. And I think, what's actually really interesting is, look, we have seen, over many years now, I think collaboration, across, throughout the vertical. So Genevieve mentioned, collaborating with universities, and I think that's just increasing. But I think what's been really interesting more recently is, as Mick said, that collaboration between competitors. And that is not something that we've traditionally seen in the legal industry. It's far more common, for example, in IT, that you would see, large, and even small IT companies kind of working together. It's not something we've traditionally seen in law, because we believe we are holding on to this kind of important IP that we couldn't possibly share. I mean, there's a recent example of, a number of the global law firms collaborating together to develop an international arbitration protocol. Ashurst was part of that. And, that's not something that we have traditionally seen in the legal industry. So I think what's really interesting is that the nature of the collaboration is changing, and it's happening kind of, within kind of and across the vertical, which is, I think, really encouraging. And to Mick's point, it's up to all of us, the panelists and everybody who's listening in here today, to really drive the change that we want to see in the legal industry. And none of us are going to do that on our own, right? It requires an industry shift. It requires us working together. It requires us thinking innovatively. And I think the more that we can actually collaborate across firms, across different types of legal service providers, the more we're actually going to see that acceleration in the shift towards how we provide services, and the acceleration in the shift of the business model.
I might just comment on that point about what Mick and Hilary were getting at, is that as an industry and a profession, and part of the disruption that we are facing is actually people outside our industry doing it better than we are. And we as a profession need to fight back. We need to claim our place in the world, put our stake in the ground and say, this is what we do, this is the value that we deliver. And it's not necessarily just a legal service. I think we've got to start looking multidisciplinary, and the collaboration piece is about bringing in those different skill sets, whether they be a skill set from another law firm, but often it's a skill set outside the law that we need to deliver as part of our solution to solve this problem, because no one individual has all the answers. So drawing in specialist expertise under one platform or one collaboration is actually more efficient than trying to silo and do it yourself. And people outside our industry are doing that really, really effectively in big accounting firms, in industry consultants, and in all industries. And so I think that's part of what we need to look at in terms of future-proofing in a disruptive legal market, is looking at, well, what is the space and the zone that we want to play in as lawyers? What does it mean to be in the legal profession or the legal industry? And part of the competition we're facing is not necessarily from other lawyers, it's actually from other participants that are not coming from within the legal industry. And so that to me is something we need to focus on in order to future-proof. And the collaboration piece is about us procuring the resources to solve the client problem, whether it be ourselves or another lawyer or another skill set outside our industry, because that's what our competitors outside the industry are actually doing.
I'll just finish off perhaps that little thread. I think there's going to be a fascinating discussion to be had over the next few years around what is legal, what is the role of the legal department, what does it mean to be a lawyer. I don't think that there is anybody has necessarily a consensus view on that definition, and that's actually what makes it exciting, because there is this opportunity to redefine that. And if it is going to be just to continue doing what we've always done, but just a little bit more efficiently and effectively, then our legal departments will probably be more efficiently run, but perhaps a bit smaller and less impactful. There's a much more interesting sort of conversation to be had around, well, what new value? Hilary talked about insights. We talked about providing thought leadership in around contract lifecycle management or running dispute and claims portfolios. Those are all really interesting areas that the legal department has no inherent right to. So it can't expect to be necessarily, it has no particular claim on, but could have a huge amount of value to add if it had the ambition to actually be, to really meaningfully move into those areas. And that is, when you think about it that way, it goes, I think, directly to your point, Mark, is about thinking differently about who your competition is and who are going to be the people that move into the space that legal departments could very effectively live in and provide value to their organisations through.
Yeah.
I'll just feed into that as well. I think this is a really interesting discussion. Mick, I think an example for the audience, just to kind of bring this to life, of kind of encroachment into the legal industry would be good. I think the one for me that springs to mind is traditionally a legal subscription service provider that employs lawyers to provide them with the IP to sell the subscription platform to our clients. So in fact, what lawyers, I think, and law firms can be doing is using technologists to build platforms and providing the IP and owning it from end to end and selling it as that subscription service, and not allowing those, I guess, providers to take over what traditionally is legal work. I think we need to be flexible and we need to be forward thinking about that. And I think it's exciting. I don't think it's threatening. I think it's just what we can be doing and what we can do well.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Another example that I think about, because it's close to, very close to sort of, I guess, my sort of daily life, is more only really recently, the US arms of the Big Four have decided to move into this space, and they're doing it through, and they have various names for it. Sort of Legal Business Solutions is one of the names, and they've very deliberately steered away from calling themselves law firms, and they're even sort of a bit hesitant about calling themselves new law firms, because in the States they're prohibited from a regulatory for regulatory reasons to offering traditional legal services. But they have sort of, and Big Four can be quite slow to move, but they have over a number of years decided that this is actually a very meaningful market that they want to enter into, and so we're seeing it in not just my firm but the other three as well. And it's because they are moving in, I think, moving right into this conversation about redefining what it is to offer legal services. They can't actually offer traditional legal services, but they now want to be in the legal industry. So if that's not a good reason for us to be debating what is up for grabs, then I don't know what is. I think it's a really, really interesting time.
Well, isn't it ironic that the Legal Profession Act doesn't even define legal services?
Yeah.
It's a really circular definition, and I think this is a discussion that is going to have to be had at some point for the law societies. What is it to be? What is a legal service? Who can provide it? And you can go one way. You can go protectionism and say, right, no, you're all out. We can only do this. Or you can open it up a bit, as they have in, say, Utah and even in the UK, when you actually have an actual Alternate Legal Service Provider Act that recognises that there is a bunch of people that sit in that zone. And this is a discussion that has not been had at the regulatory level in Australia. So the question of disruptive legal market is about who are our competitors and what zone in which do we exist. If it is an open market, fine. Let's stop being just lawyers and actually start being business providers. And I actually believe that a well-trained lawyer is the best place to be a trusted business advisor in a long-term sense, but we've lost our ground to others because we're not delivering the service in the way the clients want. So that, to me, is how we can future-proof, by actually expanding our services, being collaborative. I do think there has to be a discussion about what is a legal service and what isn't, because we do have law schools and we profess to be a profession, and therefore we must have a zone in which it is considered that we operate. And I think that needs to be better scoped than it is. But just in terms of surviving in business and future-proofing, I don't think it's enough anymore just to be a lawyer. You've got to be a good business person, a good mentor, a good trusted advisor, a good procurer of other skills, because it's not about any of us, it's about what the client needs, and that's what they need, someone to help them through their business life or their personal life.
So Hilary, listening to Marcus and Mick, you'll probably go on for another hour and a half just on those two comments alone. But listening to both Marcus and Mick, if that's not a burning platform, I don't know what is. And again, Mick, I might pull out that education piece in a minute. But having a look at the Google generation and in terms of the whole collaboration piece, and particularly some of those younger lawyers that are coming through today, is that enough to motivate change within the profession, do you think?
Look, I think it's not any one thing that is going to drive kind of the shift in the profession. I think it's a culmination of all of the things that we've, discussed here today. It's, COVID, it's changing expectations about, what work means, changing expectations of those people who are coming out of university and into the workplace. And, certainly everyone on this panel is probably doing a lot of thinking at the moment about the graduate experience. I saw a question there before about, what does it mean for law schools? And I know that law schools are certainly rethinking, the priestly 11 and, what is it that, kind of the law degrees of the future are going to look like. But I don't think it's any one thing that is going to drive the shift. I think it's a culmination of a lot of things, and it's everything that we've discussed, on this call. But I think the most important thing, and Marcus touched on this right at the end, and I think that we do tend to, this is an exciting time. I think Genevieve mentioned earlier that we shouldn't see this as a threat. So I think that, sometimes that's necessary to get, some action out of some people. But it's a really, really exciting time. And therefore, there is a propensity in some circles to kind of run around chasing what I call a shiny new toy. And you've probably, heard me talk about this a couple of times before, because I do see it, and I see it a lot, in this space at the moment, is people are trying to reverse engineer the sexy new solution to the problem. And that's never successful. I've actually never seen that work. Marcus said it before, it's about the clients. What is going to ultimately drive the shift, and we've spoken about a lot of things today, but what will drive the biggest change is listening, engaging with our clients, understanding the problems that they are trying to solve. And very often they are not even legal problems, they're business problems, which goes to the multidisciplinary approach that we've been talking about. And I think there is a shift towards holistic end-to-end solutions, not just, about the legal advice. Mick mentioned before, the investments that, the big four are making. Ashurst has made investments, for example, in its risk advisory practice, so that we can be providing that combination of the legal, the consulting and risk management, and the delivery. And that's all in response to, I think, client demand. So if I had to say, if there was one thing that's going to drive the shift, it already is the clients. They get this. Whilst I have to still spend quite a bit of time, convincing people that change is here, it's not the clients I'm having to convince. They get it. They understand the options that are available to them. They're the ones who are dealing day to day with, the complexities and challenges of an, ever increasing kind of regulation framework. They get it. And so they're driving the change, and all of the other things that we are talking about perhaps are not necessarily drivers of the change, but a response to that demand from clients.
Thanks, Hilary. And Genevieve, along those lines, Hilary's comments there reflecting on not necessarily having to convince the clients that this change is happening. How do you bring partners and the team along for the ride? Because not everybody internally, particularly in law firms, get excited about change. And certainly, I remember having some discussions internally this time last year, believe it or not, and even with some of my younger principals saying, actually, we're going to be working from home. And they kind of looked at me in horror and said, what? Now, I hardly ever see those principals in the office. It's amazing what can be done, but how do you bring everyone along for the ride?
Yeah, how not to let people get left behind. I understand that. We actually ran a hashtag Don't Get Left Behind campaign a few years ago for a bit of fun. But look, can I just say this? I think lawyers traditionally, we don't give ourselves enough credit. This is a little bit of a hobby horse for me. I think we traditionally think of ourselves as risk averse. Everyone tells us we're risk averse, etc. And we kind of lack the agile, fast-paced mindset of the startup world, etc. I don't think that's right. My view is that lawyers, and my experience as a lawyer over several decades now, has been that we excel in complexity and we excel in ambiguity. You know, a 4-3 split in the High Court, on and on and on and on, is just what we've grown up with. We've learned to accommodate that. So I think one way of thinking about this is just kind of flipping it. So we manage complexity and ambiguity from the perspective of mitigating risk. But if we use our comfort with that complexity and ambiguity to innovate, I think we can absolutely excel. So I think we first of all need to give ourselves more credit. I think the most important thing in my experience of bringing people along on a practical daily level is use cases. They can see the advantage of it. Clients say, wow, that's fantastic. You just need to explain or just need to demonstrate, I guess, the point of it. Lawyers are practical. If there's a point to it, it saves time, clients like it, it's efficient, we'll get on board. I don't think there's any magic to it, but my thing is, I think we need to give ourselves more credit.
So along those lines, Hilary, how far should we be looking ahead? You know, again, to think about the situation that we're in now, and who would have thought that, you know, 12 months ago we globally started this journey in terms of the pandemic that we're in. But from your experience and what you guys do at Ashurst, how far are you looking ahead? Is it just short-term chunks?
I think you need to look in horizons, and I think, you know, probably a lot of people here would be, you know, familiar with the McKinsey Horizon model. I think you do need to look in terms of horizons. I think you need to have absolutely a short-term and a perspective to be responding to what is happening right now, what your clients need right now. But then, you know, you absolutely need to take that medium to long-term perspective. And to an extent, I think, and this goes to our level of comfort with, you know, uncertainty and risk that Genevieve was just talking about, you have to place some bets as well. You know, and so we are certainly looking at things both in terms of what we need to be building now to be responding to the dynamics and the shifts in the market and the client demand that we're seeing coming at us right now. But we're also doing that horizon scanning. We're also looking outward and thinking about, okay, well, what does the next horizon look like? You know, what are the next 5 to 10 years look like? Because next year, Ashurst turns 200. You know, one of the oldest law firms in the world. And, you know, we haven't got this old or this young, as I like to think about it. We haven't got to where we are by not having to adapt. Over, if you think of, you know, how the world has changed over the last 200 years, we have constantly have to shift and adapt, and we're going to still have to keep doing that. And so we're definitely looking at, you know, what we think the future holds for the profession. We've spoken a lot about business models. What are those business models going to look like? Do we need to disrupt ourselves? And that's the longer term horizon view. But I don't think you can just think about it in terms of either a short term or a long term. I think you kind of need to have a bit of a dual approach and you know, quite a multifaceted strategy.
Mick, what do you sort of advise your clients when you're dealing with them in terms of horizons?
I think sort of similarly. I mean, we talk about having, you know, 1, 3 and 5 year plans. I really think the question comes down to who you are. And so if you're a law school, we've talked a bit about law schools, you need to be thinking probably a bit further ahead than you know, a commercial enterprise that's just trying to you know, that they can afford to sort of keep carrying on their business largely the same but with a decent chunk of continuous improvement and a bit of time, you know, a bit of effort, also focus on transformation, as I mentioned it before. I think perhaps even more important than timeframes is being able to move quickly. And I think that it's being a profession that's been a bit later to the party in terms of digital disruption and other change. And looking at other corporate support functions, I think that they've got better at moving faster. And so we talked a bit about contracts before. Contract lifecycle management systems have been around for a while, but the digitization of contracts is a thing that's happening right now. And if legal departments don't get involved in that discussion, they get left out of it, and then the business will make the changes. So that's perhaps a good example of something that you need to be able to move pretty fast on right now. In terms of time horizons, we've already talked about getting the basics right. If we think about legal tech, for instance, and the different evolutions of legal tech, certainly I talk about 3 waves. The first wave of legal tech was e-billing solutions. Legal departments didn't have specific legal tech before that. They came in the mid-2000s, and they transformed the way, particularly in the US, that legal departments operated between them and their vendors, and they saved a load of money, and they brought in the first legal operators within legal departments, and they created the whole sort of movement or the growth of the legal operations professionals. That time has sort of passed us now, and I think where we're in is the second wave, which is looking at basic end-to-end legal operating systems, matter management systems, contract and knowledge management systems. This is where we are now, and if you're not focusing on that right now, I think you're going to get left behind. The next wave is going to be a lot of this AI and machine learning powered point solutions that can review documents, negotiate them for us, do due diligence, do all sorts of things that really powerfully. But that's down the track. Is that going to be mainstream in 2 years, in 5 years? I don't really know the answer to that. You've got to keep an eye on that. But I think being focused on what you need to move fast on right now is perhaps a bit more important than even predicting when things are going to hit down the track.
And just building on from that, Mick, I think something that we've found helpful, or I've found helpful in the role that I'm in at Landers, is kind of chunking it down into stabilising, modernising, and transforming, and getting to the point where you have to do all of those things together. And what I mean by that, stabilising is essentially the security and the consolidation, I guess. And the keeping things upgraded. The modernising is the digital tools, the platforms, all that sort of stuff. And then the transforming is kind of the fun bit, I guess. It's the new business models. It's a bit out there. But you have to work out, you have to have a structure in place, in my opinion, to do this effectively and to keep it going, where you are pressuring each of those 3 areas, stabilising, modernising, transforming at the same time, in whatever you can accommodate, depending on your level of maturity and of course, size of practice. But I think that same approach can apply to the smallest of firms and to the largest.
Marcus, your comments in terms of mixed feedback there, in terms of where he sees the profession heading in terms of digital?
Well, I agree with those observations. I think in terms of timing, how far do you look ahead? If you look too far, you're going to do your head in. If you look too short, you're going to jump on a bandwagon that's going to fizzle out quickly. So I think there's a lot to be said of just standing back, having a think about what your mission is, look at your roadmap. And yes, there is digitization in the pipeline. There's great tools. We are all going to leverage off those because they will be selling that to the profession anyway. And we are in the best place to evaluate how to apply that data once it's refined into some form of report and then advise the future of the organisation. So we shouldn't be afraid of digitisation or contract lifecycle management tools or anything like that. Our clients will use them, we will use them. But I think it's very important in future-proofing in a disruptive market is just to wait, not look too far ahead. And I know I certainly made that mistake when I started Nexus. I was contemplating every scenario and 10 years into the future, what is the market going to look like in 10 years, which is now, and trying to build a business that I thought would have relevance in 10 years' time. And I wouldn't recommend that because you're looking down too many paths. And so I've kind of learned to narrow my field a bit to a medium-term view. I probably look at 90 days to 6 months in terms of what you can achieve in the business in the immediate sense, what is actually doable, and what you must do because your clients are telling you must do, or the industry is telling you must do. And then I'm trying to mold the business technologically to this future that I can see, which is actually around digitization, lifecycle management, and those things, and deliver solutions from within the company that have relevance in 5 to 10 years' time, so that my business is still here in 5 to 10 years' time. So, but if I was to try and look at 10 years into the future, I'd be doing 5 different things, 2 of which would be competing with each other. So it's important not to, I think, get too far ahead of ourselves or jump on bandwagons because they look bright and shiny at this point in time.
I think that's a fantastic point, Marcus. And I think, if I was to try and predict what the legal profession look like or legal departments look like in 10 years, I'd say, well, I'd probably make a pretty useless prediction that they're either going to be really sort of small and look a lot like they did today, but smaller and really focused on that really high-end bespoke legal work with really sort of artisan, a small set of artisan specialist lawyers, or they're going to crack the problem that we were discussing before, and they're going to be massive because they're going to work out how to provide amazing insight to the business and suddenly have huge responsibility over contracting disputes, rights management, etc., and become one of the most important sort of support functions, enabling functions of an organization. That's a particularly helpful prediction because the differences are enormous. But I think what's more interesting, and I'm not sure who owns the quote. It's probably, I think Abraham Lincoln started with it, but and it might have been borrowed by others. But the best, we're all familiar with it. The best way to predict the future is to create it. I think if you think about, well, there are those 2 scenarios. Which one resonates with you? If I'm a young lawyer, I know which one. Particularly if I'm a law, going through law school, I know which one I'm more interested in. And I think that rather than sort of being focused on predicting what it's going to be, what our future is going to look like, it's just getting, rolling your sleeves up and getting your hands dirty and trying to create the future that you think is actually more important for our profession, for our younger lawyers, for the clients that we serve, for the industry that we've spent all this time, toiling away at in our careers.
Well, let's wrap up.
Hey guys, as we head into the last 10 or 12 minutes, I might do a quick round of quick draw. And no, this is not FM radio, but in terms of getting everyone engaged, if for the next couple of questions that I ask, if you can just give me 2 responses to the following questions. So if you dialed in today and you're on, and you've certainly in the chat, there's been a lot of positive feedback about the commentary that you've all provided today. If you've been motivated to, I suppose, really kickstart your journey in terms of future-proofing your firm, if you had to give me 2 responses, what would they be to this question? What information do you need to inform and support your decision-making in your journey moving forward? Jen, I might hit you up first.
You actually blocked out when you said what we had to, what the limit of the answer was. Luckily, so I could 2 words, was it? 2 words.
2 responses each.
2 responses. Okay, so I think one option would be to consider the greatest number of clients who would benefit. So you're specific to your firm, or the greatest number of people within your firm that would benefit. I think that's just a little structure of way of looking at it. I mean, in terms of our firm, I look at it in terms of the private clients, the portfolio clients, and then the transactional project clients. So I could chunk it down that way as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jen. Hilary?
For me, I think it would be keeping that kind of client and industry lens. So keep looking outward, understanding what's happening in your clients and what's happening in the industries. I think for me, that's the most important thing. I think the other thing is probably just, it's the future careers point. It's, and this particularly goes to those who are starting out, in the profession. you know, what do you need to be a successful lawyer of the future? As I said, the training that we received 20 years ago, I don't necessarily think is the right training for, you know, today's legal profession. So think about how you're going to make yourself relevant in a future legal world, and make sure that you're, you know, directing your learning and your development and your career towards that.
Thanks, Hilary. Mick?
Yeah, so if this question is, what information do I need to support better decision making? I think that question really goes to the heart of data strategy. I think most, you know, so too many decisions get made that are based on gut feel or sort of, you know, anecdotal evidence or sort of, you know, I guess past experience and wisdom, when and it's certainly in legal departments, and that there's a big gap waiting to be filled for more data-based, more data-driven decision making. When we think about data strategy, we think about two things. We think about what decisions do you need to make in your legal department, and what narratives, stories, reporting do you need to give to your stakeholders. And if you can get any data to make better decisions or tell better stories, then that's probably going to be a lot better than what we've done historically. And I think that most legal departments will be very, like, you know, many, this is not again particular to legal departments, but you'll be very surprised just A, how much data you have that you're not necessarily using, and B, how very little data it requires to make a much higher quality decision or tell a much more informative story to your stakeholders. So the answer, I think, to the question is, what do you need? Not much, but a little can make a huge difference. And think about that, particularly in terms of data strategy and making better decisions and telling better stories.
Fantastic, thanks, Mick. And Marcus?
Well, if the question is, what information do you need to future-proof your journey in the law and business? I would say, well, firstly, the CLI and the ALPRA are a fantastic resource for new trends. Terry Modisette does an unbelievable job in pumping out information and engaging with industry participants within and without. So I'd say, you know, there's information out there that you can actually read and just, you know, decide for yourself what is of relevance to your business and your career future. The other thing in terms of informing yourself and future-proofing, I think it's really important for people to firstly listen to their clients and get a mentor. So that's three things, but, you know, people in the industry who are more experienced than you, who've been there, done that, are such a great resource. And there's a lot of highly experienced people out there, consultants, who can help you and mentor your career and your business. And so find one. And last, listen to your clients. Your clients are already telling you what they need and what they want. You're just not listening. So that's probably the information you need. You know, talk to your clients.
And the next question, I'm going to modify it. Melissa Lyons just chimed in on the Q&A. Thanks, Mel. Would love to know the views about the role of those who are not lawyers in future-proofing of the industry. Are we limited because we place too much effort on the lawyers and in many areas that others are better placed to provide holistic services for clients? So my question, sort of in a very short way, that I was going to ask, which Melissa's alluded to, is who do you consult? Who do you work with to future-proof your practice? Jen?
Okay, well, I think my answer to that would be it's a dual approach. You need to build up capabilities within the firm. In our firm, we have an innovation hub where we have tech managers and people with different skill sets. And the way, and part of their remit is to involve the lawyers in that. But then I think this point that we've been talking about as well with external collaborations is just so important. So we do the internal building capabilities and the external collaborations with universities, with organisations like CLI and ALPMA, etc., and others, and with other law firms. It's so critical to do both.
Thanks, Jen. Hilary, 2 points in terms of, who do you consult with?
Well, I think if you kind of reframe it in terms of thinking about what we're actually providing to clients, and we've discussed this earlier about solutions. If we actually think about the fact that what clients are looking for are business solutions rather than legal advice, then it breaks down a lot of barriers internally and externally. You know, it breaks down that barrier between business services and legal, for example, and all of a sudden the whole of the firm becomes integral to delivering kind of the end solution to the client. So that's the first thing I would say, is I think we need to break down those barriers internally and see everybody in the firm as contributing to the overall solution that we want to deliver to the client. The other one for me, and I mentioned this earlier, and we've spoken a lot about the multidisciplinary approach. Again, if we reframe it as a solution, it's not just about the legal advice, it's then about the risk management, and it's then about the implementation of that and kind of the ongoing management. And so I think it's, you know, bringing together that legal, that consulting delivery to provide those holistic solutions.
Thank you. Mick?
Yeah, I completely am sold on the multidisciplinary approach, which is why I've joined a multidisciplinary organisation. I think that when we talk about sort of who do we collaborate with, I actually think within our legal departments we need to build that capability within the legal departments. Now, sometimes that'll be directly hiring into the legal departments, other times it'll be through service providers and partnerships, but we need to be thinking more seriously about having developing those multidisciplinary skills. I think legal departments will need to stop referring to lawyers and non-lawyers in their departments. I think that that might be a nice start. The other thing I'd say is we should just be paying more and more attention to the other corporate support functions that have been on this journey longer than us. I mentioned finance, HR, procurement and others. You can find them in other sort of service providers like ours, but you can find them in your own organisations and learn what journey they've been on. They're not perfect, but often you will find a lot of stories that are really relevant to legal departments that will make you rethink whether or not we need to reinvent the wheel as much as we sometimes think we do, because we have a view that our legal departments are special and there's won't necessarily benefit from the learnings of these other functions.
Thanks, Mick. And Marcus?
Well, just because it's Mel asking the question, I won't refer to non-lawyers. We have industry professionals and we have qualified lawyers, and we are no longer a profession as such. We're an industry and we are an ecosystem, and that ecosystem absolutely needs skill sets beyond the legal function in order to deliver anything effectively, whether it be lawyering or business services. And I believe that we do need to get beyond the concept of just a lawyer and be, a business advisor with a legal skill. So that means there is, I think, a huge future ability for people who don't actually become lawyers but work within law firms and legal departments and as a key role to support the legal function and make it effective.
Fantastic. And guys, just one final question, I suppose, in terms of wrapping up. But as leaders, if you had to give one piece of advice to other leaders on future-proofing their legal organisation in a disruptive legal market, what would that one piece of advice be? Genevieve?
Oh, my favourite bit of advice is do something every day that scares you. And I think that applies to future-proofing a law firm or a legal business.
Fantastic. Thank you. Marcus?
Back to basics, humanity. Get that right, everything else will follow.
Fantastic. Hilary?
I'm going to borrow from Stephen Covey here and say, start with the end in mind, the solutions. Again, what is it we're actually trying to solve for?
And Mick?
Hilary stole mine. I was going to say start with strategy. So I can't say that. So I think just make sure you've got some metrics. You just need a few to be able to so that you can actually have an objective, defensible debate about the change you're trying to make and the change you are making.
Hi guys, thanks for those pieces of quick grabs in terms of cold gems. A couple of key points that I've taken away from the discussion today. Collaboration, and we're going to see more collaboration amongst competitors. And Mick, I think it was you that commented, collaboration's ultimately going to become a competitive advantage.
the difference between end-to-end and point-to-point, and fundamentally our clients have the answers. Don't necessarily, it's not necessarily the law firm's responsibility to come up with the answers. Genevieve, you commented, and I think there was a bit of feedback on the chat around this, stabilising, modernising and transformation. I think that in terms of chunking it down in 3 simple categories is fantastic. And again, I think some of those grabs there right at the end have been really simple but powerful pieces of information to take away. To everyone who's joined us this afternoon, thank you for your time. To Genevieve, to Hilary, to Mick, to Marcus. Guys, look, thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you to the CLI, thank you to Outmar, and for those of you who've joined us throughout Australia, New Zealand and across the globe, I hope you've got a lot out of today's session, and we look forward to the next couple of days of this great online virtual conference. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Warrick.
Thanks, everyone.